Hello everyone, I know you watched this video to accompany you to sleep. So if you like this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, don't forget to tell me where you are from and what time you watched this video. Let's jump straight into the story. We're back in Las Vegas, a city that never sleeps, with anything and everything happening all hours of the day and night. Home to over 500,000 people, one of which was Shauna and Castleton. Shauna had grown up in a Mormon family in Salt Lake City, and in 1994, at the age of 28, she decided to make the big move to Las Vegas, 500 miles away. For a while, she worked selling cosmetics at Saks Fifth Avenue and Neiman Marcus. But Shauna loved the fun, glitz and glamour of Vegas nightlife, and saw a lot of opportunity for herself in this environment. She started working as a cocktail waitress at the Fiesta, before moving to one of the most popular and prestigious casinos in the area, the Palms Hotel Casino. She settled in quickly, her colleagues became a second family for her customers loved her, and Shauna adored her job. Those that knew her said she was always laughing and living in the moment. Her friends said she had an innocence about her. She was a free spirit and always had a positive outlook on things no matter the situation. In 2002, Shauna met George TFA at the Palms. George would go there a lot, and he said he was quick to notice Shauna because of how hard she worked. She was always busy, running around and keeping guests happy. George was a star athlete and homecoming king at his school, and his family say he was charismatic, funny and charming, always one to lend a hand to those that needed it. He had trained at the United States Military Academy, also known as West Point, and was now working as a firefighter. The attraction was instant, and the pair hit it off straight away, becoming inseparable immediately. George told his sisters that Shauna was his whole world, and a year later, their world got a little bigger when they welcomed a baby girl whom they called Madison. Friends said George was very protective of his new family, and Shauna was besotted with her little girl. A couple of years later, George and Shauna married in a beautiful beach wedding in Hawaii. 2 more years would pass, by all accounts, with everything staying the same as it had always been. That was until George suffered a huge setback with his finances. He lost a lot of money in the housing market crash, making Shauna the main earner for the family, and the financial stress began to impact the couple. Shauna eventually confided in people that George had become quite jealous and resentful, and it wasn't long before his behavior escalated and became more controlling. On one occasion, George said she looked like a slut on her way to work one day, made all the worse, she said, because her little girl had heard it. She told friends things got even more strange when he befriended a homeless man, getting him to do odd jobs around the house and garden. Shauna said she found the man creepy, and whenever he was around, it really unsettled her. Tensions continued to mount in the relationship, and with so much financial strain, coupled with George's sudden and spiteful change in personality, Shauna moved out and into her own townhouse apartment in Summerlin. The pair started sharing custody of Maddie, as well as seeing a marriage counselor. Shauna was devastated at the breakdown of the relationship, and although she was hopeful they might one day make things work, she also knew divorce was a strong possibility. She would send George a text that read, "Once we live separate, I don't think there's any going back." George was also upset and told people that the complications divorce would bring wasn't something he wanted to go through. After living apart for a while, Shauna was beginning to find a new routine. She was still working long hours and was always busy, but the love she had for her job meant she didn't mind. After one late shift, Shauna returned home to find her apartment had been broken into, and everything was a mess. Several precious and sentimental valuables, including her engagement ring, had been stolen. One item that had been taken that struck everyone as odd were her bikini bottoms. Whoever had broken in had also left some boxer briefs inside. Shauna was frightened and on edge, but did her best to put the incident behind her. Shauna clocked off and left work as normal, just after 3 a.m. She lived about a 30-minute drive away from her apartment and arrived home at around 3:30 a.m. She parked up outside and went inside via the door in her garage. George had just finished a long shift at the fire department and picked up 8-year-old Maddie from her grandmother's. They both drove over to Shauna's to collect some of Maddie's belongings. They entered Shauna's home to find that it had been totally ransacked. Shauna TFA was lying dead on the floor. "Do you know what the address is and you don't live there, correct?" "No, my wife and I live in separate places." "Okay. When's the last time you saw her?" All right, you did good. Take a deep breath. I'm a fireman. I was at work yesterday, so I saw her about 36 hours ago, I guess." "Okay, a day and a half ago. I'm thinking something like that. How old's your daughter? She's 8. And she's with you, or where's she at? She's right here with me. Okay. What's your name, sir? My name is George TFA. Okay. Do you see anything suspicious around her? Any weapons, any knives, guns? No, I had to get my daughter out of there. We came over, and the garage door was open, and it's never open. And so we went in to grab some stuff for my daughter. My wife sleeps during the day because she works at night. Right. And she was on the floor when we walked in. Where are you at right now? I'm at the garage right now. Okay. We do have an officer on the way, so just stay right outside and we'll get somebody out there for you, okay? Oh God. I didn't touch the body to check for a pulse. That's okay. We'll have medical on the way as well, okay? Okay. Thanks. Thank you. It was clear from the position of the blood in Shauna's body that she had been attacked as she had gone upstairs. The injuries to her body indicated the murder weapon was likely a hammer, and she had suffered horrendously in her last moments. Her skull was crushed, and her fingers were broken from trying to protect herself. There was a hole in the side of her head that was so deep, at first, paramedics believed she had been shot. A neighbor reported to the police that they had heard a thudding sound coming from the apartment between 3:30 and 4 o'clock a.m., but as she normally arrived home at this time, it didn't seem out of the ordinary. A little while later, another neighbor contacted police after finding Shauna's phone, health card, and some of her makeup along the side of a road nearby. As is common with most cases, her estranged husband, George, would be the first to be interviewed. George was at the fire station the day before, and had worked a 24-hour shift. After confirming this with his colleagues, detectives were happy with his alibi, but this left police baffled and confused as to where to start looking. They didn't know if the burglary 3 weeks earlier was linked, or was a scary coincidence. But as Shauna's belongings were found outside of her home, it was entirely possible that the same person had come back to take more things, and, not realizing Shauna would be up and awake, killed her and fled the scene. They also didn't know if Shauna was a completely random target, or if she was targeted for a specific reason. This left Shauna's casino colleagues fearful too, with all of them working similar shift patterns. Could one of them be next? They wondered. But Shauna's sister Paula and her husband, however, believed there was a lot more to this than a random robbery gone wrong. Despite George's alibi, they still wanted to ask him some questions. Paula decided to give George a call and find out what was going on. George then passed the phone over to a grief counselor who was at the scene, and Paula just said exactly what she was thinking. My suspicions that based on, many conversations I've had with my sister. After this, Paula and her husband hung up and booked the first flight out to Vegas, their minds going 1,000,000 miles an hour. Paula said she would forever be haunted by the way in which her sister died. She said the excruciating pain she must have endured, and the terror and realization that she was going to die. Just 24 hours after Shauna's body was found, police received a tip-off that would blow the case wide open. A man that went by the name of Big Will told detectives he had a homeless friend that he knew only as Greyhound. Greyhound told him he had killed a woman with a hammer. Big Will recalled he wasn't scared, he wasn't upset or traumatized. He was laughing and happy, as if he'd just completed a mission. Big Will told Greyhound that the second he saw anyone on the news that had been killed in the way he had told him, he would have to report him. And as word spread that Shauna had been murdered, this confirmed to Big Will that Greyhound had been telling the truth. He went straight to the police. Greyhound was homeless, and currently living in a tent on the outskirts of the city. Big Will said he would frequently go to a store called Albertsons to steal food and sell drugs in the gas station across the road. Authorities teamed up with Big Will and drove to these locations, believing this would be the best place to find him. They didn't have to wait long before they spotted him. When officers approached Greyhound, they found he had drugs on him and were able to put him up on drugs charges while they looked into Big Will's claims. Greyhound's real name was Noel Stevens. He was actually well known to police already, for various reasons, including theft and drugs-related charges. While he admitted to selling drugs, he vehemently denied having anything to do with Shauna's death. Noel was a low-level criminal, and it was definitely a surprise that he would have traveled so far to commit such a huge crime, without really leaving with anything he could have sold. Something wasn't making sense to the interviewing officers. There also didn't seem to be any connection between Noel and Shauna. Police managed to find out where he was sleeping, and when he was in custody, began searching the area near his tent. The area was remote and very secluded, way up into the desert, away from everyone and everything. Officers worried that because the area was so vast, they could be searching for any potential evidence for weeks. But Noel had not dumped anything far away, and just a short walk away from his tent, they found a pair of his trousers, covered in blood, a price tag belonging to a hammer, and a bloody pair of underwear. Back at the station, detectives were checking through his phone, and they soon found a single contact that seemed to tie everything together for them. George. When asked who George was, Noel said, "That's my friend the firefighter." Noel Stevens was the man George TFA had befriended, the same man Shauna had been wary about since the moment she met him. Police used the barcode for the hammer to find out where sold that particular make, and from this, they got hold of some CCTV that left them shocked. The camera inside the store clearly showed George TFA and Noel Stevens shopping together and buying the hammer that would ultimately be used to kill Shauna. Officers now felt very strongly that George was at the center of what had happened to Shauna. Back at the station, officers presented Noel with all the evidence. Finally, Noel admitted to being Shauna's killer. But just as police already suspected, Noel said it was her estranged husband George that wanted her dead, and he had paid him $600 to carry out the crime on his behalf. Noel claimed that he and George had spent ages planning it. George had gotten a key cut for Noel, paid for some dark clothing for him, and had asked him to stage a robbery weeks before she was killed, almost like a practice run. Noel said that on September 29th, after he broke in, he hid in her closet for a while. He then moved into the living room and waited for her there as he heard her pulling up. Shauna was on her way up the stairs. Noel followed her up and began his attack there. He said she cried and begged for her life, screaming, "Why are you doing this?" over and over, as he struck her a total of 17 times. He then said the hammer broke, and he continued to hit her with the hammerhead until she stopped moving. After retelling the shocking story, he offered to take detectives to where he had buried the hammerhead in the desert. And finally, they had the murder weapon. It had now been 9 days since Shauna was discovered that early September morning, and on October 8th, detectives informed George's mother and sister that he was now being investigated in relation to her death. They were horrified and adamant that he had nothing to do with it. A matter of minutes later, George's sister called her brother and told him. George jumped straight into his truck and set off on a fast and dangerous drive around Vegas. This would end in George going head-on into a concrete wall at the end of Summerlin Parkway, the Las Vegas Beltway. He was going more than 80 miles per hour. Authorities noted that there were no marks on the road, showing he hadn't tried to brake and stop the car. And this was an intentional crash and an attempt to take his own life. George survived thanks only to his seatbelt and was treated for his injuries at University Medical Center. 2 days later, officers arrived at George's hospital bed and informed him he was now under arrest. George's reply was simply okay. He then asked if he could call his attorney, take a shower and brush his teeth. Authorities felt they had a strong case, and enough to bring charges forward against both men. Just 3 months later, Noel Stevens would plead guilty in exchange for the death penalty being taken off the table, and said he would also testify for the prosecution as their star witness. He was sentenced to 42 years to life in prison. In August 2015, George, who was still pleading not guilty, entered the courtroom, ready to begin his trial. He rides in that bathroom area. He comes out of that bathroom area when Shauna walks in the residence, and he hits her over the head with the hammer several times. And he does break the hammer. Opening statements began Tuesday in the trial of George TFA, a former Las Vegas firefighter accused of hiring a homeless man to kill his wife, Shauna TFA, who was beaten to death with a hammer after returning home from work at the Palms in September of 2012. During the first day of testimony, the prosecution played the recording of the 911 call from TFA. 911, this is TFA. I need police, fire, or medical. Police, I think they need to report a break-in at the door. Shauna's family were there for every single day, wearing her favorite color pink. Her family gave lead prosecutor, Mark DiGiacomo, Shauna's lucky poker chip, which she kept with him as a good luck charm. George would never take the stand himself, but an array of witnesses, including his sisters and close friends, would testify about the man they said they really knew. A man they said was kind, compassionate, and hardworking, and would have no part in such a heinous crime. The prosecution felt their case was exceptionally strong. Alongside the CCTV and everything Noel had told them, they also had numerous phone records that showed that George had called Noel 87 times in the month of September 2012, and 5 times the night before the murder. An unbelievable amount of times for someone that just occasionally did the odd job here and there. The defense would argue, however, that the CCTV proved nothing. They were simply buying tools so Noel could continue to do work around the house. The star witness, Noel, took to the stand and told the court the same story, in all its detail, that he had told the police several years prior. How did you meet George? I was sitting one day out in the front yard, smoking a cigarette and drinking, and he was walking his dog. And that's how I met him. When you first met him, describe what kind of communication you would have with him. What kind of relationship, for lack of a better word, did you have with him? I told him that I'd do yards and stuff like that. And did he give you any work? Yes. Can you give the ladies and gentlemen of the jury any idea how long you've known George? A few years. Years? Yeah. Describe your relationship with George at this point. What do you mean? Well, are you just doing work for him, or is there something? We're friends. What kind of things have you done together? We've worked out stuff like that. When you go over there, what's his relationship with Shauna like? Good, bad, what? Bad. They're arguing. What are they arguing about? All kinds of stuff, money. Did George ever tell you about any specific complaints he had about Shauna? Yeah, she spent too much money. Does there come a point in time where you are asked to do something at that second house related to the divorce? Yeah, kill Shauna. And when George first says to you something about killing Shauna, did you believe him? No. Describe for us the best you can what it is, the nature of the conversation, what happens. He allowed me $1,000. I tell him no. You tell him no. Yes. Why do you tell him no? Because I don't really believe him. I think he's what? Blowing hard smoke at me. You think he's just blowing off some steam? Yeah. Is there something that changes at some point? What do you mean? At some point. Does he say something to you that causes you to believe him? Yeah. He raises the price up. What did he raise the price up to? $5,000. Was he going to hand you $5,000 as soon as it was done? Or was there some plan on how to pay you? He was going to pay me when he got the money for insurance. He said alongside the $600 cash from George, he also made some more money off of Shauna's engagement ring, which he stole and then pawned. Noel also claimed that he was actually promised tens of thousands by George after the murder was carried out, and detectives believe Noel called George from the gas station phone the day after, which was possibly to arrange for the rest of the payment. This meeting, however, would never happen, because that's the day the detectives made contact with Noel, and he was taken in. Noel also testified that George had told him to use a fiberglass hammer, because a wooden hammer might break during the attack. He said he took both hammers to the house, but ended up using the wooden one, which did in fact break. What to do when she comes through the garage? I wait until she walks by the door. When she walks by the door, then I come out. And what are you holding when she comes out? A hammer. Now the hammer that you're using, why that hammer? Because I didn't want to go and buy another one. Let me ask you this, that hammer, where did you get that hammer from? Lowe's. But that day, where was it between the time you bought it at Lowe's until the time you used it to kill Shauna? At my first camp, and why didn't you use that hammer? You bought it before you bought some of the other hammers. Why not keep that hammer and use it every time you tried? Because it's wood. And what was the problem with wood? It would break. Who told you that? George. So now you have the wood hammer in your hand, because you were cheap. What happens? I hit her in the head. I know that you probably don't want to do this, but you're going to have to describe for the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what happens when you come out that door and you're holding that hammer. She tells me why I'm doing this. She says, why are you doing this? Yes. Now are you covered up in such a way that she shouldn't know who you are? Yeah, I have a mask on. Do you say anything to her? No. What'd you do? I hit her in the head. When you hit her in the head, what happens? She hits the floor. And after she hits the floor, what do? I jump on top of her. And if you jump on top of her, what do? I keep on hitting her. With the hammer? Yes. What happens to the hammer while this is happening? It breaks. So after the hammer breaks, what do? I throw the piece of wood away and grab the metal piece and keep on hitting her. Although the prosecution argued that everything Noel had said could be backed up by CCTV, phone records, and the time frame of events, while he was being cross-examined, Noel admitted to often having auditory and visual hallucinations. In the defense's eyes, this gave them enough reason to put forward the idea that Noel could have simply made the whole thing up. They weren't disputing that he killed Shauna, but the idea that George was involved was a lie. Robert Langford, George's attorney, said it was a good story, but nothing more than that. If you put it all together just the right way, that's what you get. But there's a lot of reason not to put it together that way, he said. It was said that Noel adored George, seeing him as a close friend and looking up to him in many ways. And the prosecution said that's all it took to be able to manipulate him very easily. They said George was the only one with a reason to want Shauna dead. They also believed that George may have been intending to kill Noel, as he had recently purchased a gun. If Noel had been killed, George would likely have got away with the crime completely. They, along with Shauna's family, felt George was someone that was so used to getting everything he wanted all his life, and having vast amounts of success. After the couple's marriage began to spiral, and he was losing control over this, as well as his finances, it was all too much for him to handle. Both teams finished presenting all their evidence, and the jury would spend 3 long days deliberating. As they announced they had come to a verdict, it was extremely tense in the courtroom, and no one could be sure which way things would go. Before they went in, Mark DiGiacomo said he put Shauna's lucky poker chip in his pocket. The clerk will read the verdict. The defendant will rise. District Court, Clark County, the State of Nevada Plaintiff versus George M. TFA Defendant. Case number C, 286 to 317, Department number 20. Verdict. Read the jury. In the above entitled case, find the defendant, George M. TFA as follows. Count 1. Conspiracy to commit murder. Guilty of conspiracy. George TFA, the former Las Vegas firefighter, was convicted Thursday of paying a homeless man to kill his wife. After 5 days of testimony, and about 3 hours of closing arguments, a jury of 7 men and 5 women took 15 hours to find George TFA guilty of first-degree murder and 6 other counts. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, are these your verdicts as read? So say you want, so say you all. And we begin with that breaking news. Former Las Vegas firefighter George TFA, accused of hiring a homeless man to kill his wife, stands guilty on all counts. He showed no emotion as the verdict was read out. The jury then had to decide whether or not he should receive any parole eligibility. Local firefighter George TFA will now spend the rest of his life behind bars. After just 4 hours of deliberation, the jury decided to sentence TFA to life without the possibility of parole. Action News reporter Marissa Keniston was in court today. She joins us live with more right now. Marissa, while the jury had 3 decisions, life without the possibility of parole, 20 years to life, and 20 to 50 years, take a listen as they read their decision. Having found the defendant, George M. TFA, guilty of count 7, first-degree murder with use of a deadly weapon, imposed a sentence of life without the possibility of parole. He was also given an additional 81 years for convictions of conspiracy, burglary, and robbery. The judge said in part, "My sentence today is not based upon holding you to a higher standard. My sentence is based upon the fact that this was just pure evil." Shauna's sister Paula was happy with the result, saying, "George is a controlling manipulator, and I think the worst hell for him would be standing in prison for the rest of his life and not being able to control anything. We just want to thank the Clark County DA's office, Mark DiGiacomo and Pam Wickerley, and everybody involved, homicide detectives. It was almost 3 years ago that Shauna was brutally murdered, and we're so happy that justice was served. We started this fight for her, and we've got so many supporters here in Las Vegas. So many people love Shauna, and we're just happy that we can finally put this past us and move forward and find whatever our normal is, without Shauna in our lives. But we're just so happy and satisfied that the jurors saw the truth." George decided he wanted to appeal the verdict. His 107-page appeal included handwritten notes from George himself. He wrote about himself in the third person, saying in part, it appeared that for the first time, he was now admitting to orchestrating the crime, but said it was because he was under the effects of prescription medication. An online fundraiser was set up to try and garner money to fund George's appeal. But his appeal was lost and his conviction upheld. George then claimed his lawyer, Robert Langford, was ineffective, ignored his mental health issues, and failed to request a psychiatric evaluation. He said he had suffered an injury years ago and took various painkillers and medications, including prescribed hormones and Adderall. Robert Langford said he has since withdrawn from the case. Shauna's family went on to found Justice for Shauna, a group that raises awareness about domestic violence and abusive relationships. Her family would also later move her grave from Las Vegas back to her home state of Utah, so she could be next to her father. Maddie is now living with Shauna's mother and spends a lot of time with her Aunt Paula. Paula says whenever she talks about her mother, She smiles a lot, and it's clear that their relationship was always full of laughter and fun. Paula said the loss of her sister profoundly affected so many people. But the biggest tragedy is how her daughter will grow up without a mom that was so devoted to her. The judge that sentenced George said, "It said that Shauna's biggest and purest joy in life was being a mother." And Paula would say, "Story 2. This case takes us to Jackson, Michigan. In 2014, it was home to 28-year-old Frances Marie Craig. Known to everyone as Franny, her friends called her a firecracker. With an infectious laugh and a great sense of humor, she made friends quickly, was easygoing and easy to talk to. People said they met her, and instantly felt like they'd known her for years. She would do anything she could for anyone she met, and the amount of good things people had to say about her was in abundance. As the mother of 2 young girls, aged 5 and 3, and holding down 2 jobs, it's safe to say there was never a slow day. Her friend said she always loved the idea of being married. She was talking about her wedding before she even met someone, but this all changed in 2012. After splitting from her children's father, she found love with 29-year-old Eric Wolf. He was divorced and had a young daughter too, Alexis, and they all got on straight away. 2 years later, the family started living together. And when Eric proposed, Franny was on cloud 9 and got stuck into planning right away. One of her friends said she was quite comical when planning her wedding. She even started calling herself a bridezilla. Her wedding was just 1 month away, and the couple had bought a house for their new family, and Franny had big plans for her future. August 10th, 2014. At around 6:30 a.m., Eric arrived home from his 12-hour night shift and fell asleep downstairs. A few hours later, his daughter ran down and frantically woke him up. She had made a frightening discovery in the bedroom. She had walked in to find Franny on the floor, and she was cold to the touch. The children were quickly removed from the house, and everything was taped off. Her friends started gathering outside the house, all of them thinking it was just a misunderstanding or a sick lie that had spread and got out of control. The scene upstairs was brutal and shocked even the most tenured of detectives. Franny had been stabbed 90 times. She was lying in between the bed and the wall, with 2 cable ties around each wrist. This indicated to police that she had been tied to the bed and restrained before being cut loose. Authorities said it was nothing short of overkill and blind rage on the killer's part. Her smashed phone was found outside, meters from the house. It had either been dropped by the killer or killers on the way out, or it had been thrown against the tree with the intent of breaking it. Her death was obviously quickly ruled as a homicide, but the way she was killed was withheld from the public. In fact, few details were released to the media, and the police were keeping everything very close to their chests. Evidence, including the cable ties, was sent to the Michigan State Police Crime Lab naturally. Police started with the people closest to her, and that meant an interview with her fiancé, Eric. What he said concerned and confused them straight away. Officers said he didn't seem surprised, angry, or upset. As the interview drew to a close, Eric said something else that raised concern. Another very odd comment to make, they thought. The security records at his workplace showed that Eric was clocked in until 6:30 a.m. But not every exit in the building was covered by cameras, leading investigators to wonder if Eric could have snuck out and got back in undetected. Franny's friends also said that as happy as they were for her that she was getting married, something she had wanted for years, they weren't too sure about Eric being the one. Some even started looking at him straight away, thinking he had to have been behind it. Eric denied having anything at all to do with the death of his fiancée. He said he was devastated and struggling to process it. But given the nature of the crime, and the fact the police weren't sure, Franny's daughters and Eric's daughter were temporarily placed in the custody of other family members. Friday, August 15th, was a particularly tough day for everyone as it would have been Franny's 29th birthday. And all that was on everyone's minds was what had happened 5 days before. Her co-workers spent the day pooling all their tips to help pay for the funeral costs. Franny had no enemies, held no grudges, and everyone she knew was in agreement that there was simply nobody that would have ever wanted to hurt her, let alone do something like this. Authorities then started looking at her place of work and wondered if something had happened there. It came to their attention that one day as she was on shift, she had spotted some young shoplifters and confronted them. But their mother quickly turned on Franny and attacked her. This left her with physical injuries and a lot of emotional trauma. The woman was charged and convicted, so her record made her easy to find. But she had an alibi and was simply nothing to do with it. Police then spoke to an old boyfriend who had just moved back into the area, but he too had no information to offer them. A former roommate of the couple called Ryan gave a statement too, and in his interview he vouched for Eric's character, telling them he was a great guy, and he didn't see any problems within the couple's relationship. With this, police had now all but exhausted their options, and they knew that everything was resting on the forensics. But that would take time. The primary person of interest was still Eric, and they carried on trying to piece everything together. A funeral for Franny was held, and there was a huge turnout. The prosecutor said even her mail carrier showed up to her funeral because she made such an impact on that person. That's how loved Frances Craig was. There was still a sense of unease hanging over the community. Her killer was still out there, and everyone was looking over their shoulders. It was now 3 months later, and the evidence from the crime scene had finally all been processed. And with this, the investigation took a new turn. A turn that nobody saw coming. On the cable ties, they found DNA. But it was not Eric's, and it was not from any of the people they had already questioned. It actually matched a convicted murderer, and his name was Cortez Butler. Currently out on parole after serving 25 years for second-degree murder, authorities were dumbfounded. As far as they could tell, 43-year-old Cortez had no link to Franny at all. He didn't live anywhere near the area. He had never worked with her. There was simply no connection. Police didn't know if it was something as simple as Cortez working somewhere with the cable ties, potentially in a warehouse or somewhere similar, or if it was something far darker, like Eric or someone else hiring Cortez to carry out the murder. Cortez's parole officer was tracked down, and through him they obtained his phone records. His phone records showed a lot of contact with 2 other people, Rodney and Clifford McKee. Rodney was a well-known heroin dealer with a long list of convictions, and his uncle Clifford had served 20 years for murder. Police located Cortez in custody, as he had actually just been arrested for yet another murder. 79-year-old Charles Graham was killed following a dispute over pills and money, and Cortez had been charged in connection. To everyone's surprise, when they started asking him about Franny, he didn't try to lie or deny. He said he knew all about her, admitted to being her killer, and agreed to tell them everything, as long as the interview was not taped. Police were desperate for answers, and they agreed, knowing it was a high-risk strategy as it might not be admissible in court. Detectives asked him outright if Eric Wolf was behind it all, but Cortez said Eric had nothing to do with anything. The man at the center of it was Rodney McKee. What investigators started to uncover would point to a shocking and twisted scheme, a plot that had began just a few months before Franny was killed. It all started back in March 2014. A Jackson apartment was set on fire, and police quickly arrested Rodney for it. He was charged with arson and carrying a concealed weapon. He had started the fire to get at a lady named Donna when she refused to sell drugs for him. Donna and her son were left homeless when everything had burned down, and Donna's son turned out to be Ryan, the former roommate of Franny and Eric, who had already spoken to the police. Ryan hadn't stayed with them long, moving out just a short while later, and in June 2014, Franny and Eric finally found their perfect home and set about moving themselves. But before his arson trial, Rodney contacted his uncle Clifford. He wanted to find out where Ryan now lived, and as he was a witness to the arson kill him. Clifford contacted Cortez Butler, whom he had met in prison, and offered him $10,000 for the hit. But the only address they had for Ryan was Franny and Eric's. Cortez said he had entered the home through the unlocked garage door. He crept upstairs, pausing briefly to notice that the children were asleep in their rooms. He then found Franny asleep in her bed. He bound her with the cable ties and covered her eyes. He asked where Ryan was, and she said she had no idea. He then stabbed her at least 20 times in the neck, before continuing his violent attack. The prosecutor said Franny was the very definition of collateral damage, and she was as innocent a victim as anyone could possibly be. It was also terrifying for Ryan that someone had gone to such horrific lengths to silence him, and he had almost lost his life too. Even after killing Franny, the wrong person, the trio weren't deterred from trying to get to Ryan. They all continued to stalk him, but fortunately, Cortez was arrested before anything happened to Ryan. On September 1st, 2015, Cortez Butler pled no contest to second-degree murder and was sentenced to 25 to 40 years in prison in Charles Graham's killing. And 1 month later, Cortez, Rodney, and Clifford were all charged with open murder, conspiracy to commit murder in the first degree, and first-degree home invasion. Open murder means a combination of both first and second-degree murder, and gives the jury the chance to determine the appropriate degree based on the evidence presented. The McKees were also charged with soliciting murder. Fortunately for the prosecution, the officers that listened to Cortez's statement off the record were allowed to talk about it in court. Phone records put Clifford and Cortez together in the Jackson area at the time of the murder, and they had contacted each other more than 200 times in the day surrounding it. More than 8,000 pages of phone records were gone through. At the trial, Cortez laughed and smiled at the cameras and bragged about the crimes he had committed on the stand. But when he was asked about Franny, suddenly it was nothing but denial. The prosecution said he wanted to run the show and keep hold of that power for as long as he could. 27-year-old Rodney McKee, 49-year-old Clifford McKee, and 43-year-old Cortez Butler were all found guilty of murder in the first degree, conspiracy to commit murder in the first degree, and first-degree home invasion. The McKees were also found guilty of soliciting murder. Clifford McKee hired Butler to kill a Jackson man who witnessed his nephew, Rodney McKee, commit arson. Butler thought the witness lived with Frances Craig and her fiancé, Eric Wolf, and broke into their home. He then tied up Frances Craig and stabbed her. All three men faced life in prison without parole. They were all sentenced to life in prison. Clifford refused to attend the sentencing, and Franny's mom, Robin, spoke directly to them in her statement. 360 days is all the time that these two minus the one that didn't have the balls to come here today chose for us to have our daughter. As of August 10th, 2014, our lives have never been the same, nor will they ever be again. You took from our family the most precious, beautiful person in the world. Frances was our everything. Losing her is the most excruciating pain you have to endure. We have to wake up every morning knowing that there will never be another phone call, another conversation. We will never hear her laugh again or see her beautiful smile. Every holiday there will always be an empty chair. The last night of her life, she took her children to the fair, something she loved to do. She took them home and put them to bed because she had to work the next day. Little did she know that would be the last hug and kiss she would ever get from them. She was in her house, and if you're not safe there, you're not safe anywhere. You went in there and did what you did. You left our only child on the floor to let her innocent little babies find her the next day. You left us with the task of explaining to them why they no longer have a mother, and how there's bad people in the world, and they hurt their mommy. We had to explain to them how Grandma and Grandpa are going to make sure the bad guys go away who did this to them. We had to force ourselves to look at the pictures of what you did to our daughter, so we can relate to the pain and sorrow that they had to endure. We can't reach inside their heads and help them understand and take the pain away, especially when we can't make our own go away. This unholy trinity is as evil a group of individuals as I have seen. I dare say that all of us in our career have yet to see this level of evil, could work for the rest of our careers, and could work for yet another career beyond that, and not see this level of evil. I never imagined I would stand in front of you, or any judge, and ask you to sentence somebody for his third murder conviction, and somebody else in the same group for his second. I still can't believe I'm standing here doing this, and although it sounds really odd to say, and I haven't quite figured out the right way to say it in a very odd way, I'm certainly not grateful for what happened to Franny and what has happened to her family, but I am grateful that they came here to Jackson County to have Jackson County law enforcement rally behind their crime. The prosecutor said, "I wish I had known her, and I hope I honored her in the handling of this case," something which everyone agreed she very much did. All three men challenged their sentences. The Michigan Court of Appeals has decided to uphold murder convictions against three men who killed a Jackson County woman as part of a botched murder. For hire plot, Jackson County Prosecutor Jerry Jarzinka says the men will most likely appeal to the state Supreme Court. In 2020, the Michigan Supreme Court agreed to hear the appeals for Clifford and Rodney. People versus Clifford and Rodney McKee. Mr. Halpern and Ms. Chiron, I assume you have sorted out how you will use your time. Each side has 20 minutes, and you all may attempt to reserve some of that, but I will let you proceed in whatever way you've decided to proceed. And these are now underway with them. In 2022, the lawyers for Rodney and Clifford put forth the arguments for a new trial. But there is currently no update regarding the outcome of this. Cortez Butler also appealed to the Supreme Court, but this was denied straight away. It was a series of events that left everyone shocked and horrified. Frances Craig's future was bright, and she had everything she had ever dreamed of. Her life was so cruelly snatched away, all because one callous individual went to the most extreme lengths to try and avoid being caught. for yet more heinous crimes. An amazing mother, daughter, sister, fiancée, friend and colleague, she is missed dearly and a huge gap will always be present in the community she once called home. Story 3 Tuesday, March 6, 2012. A woman was sailing a barge down Regent's Canal near Broadway Market, London. She stopped at Acton Lock. As the lock was filling with water, the side of the boat hit something. A suitcase. The suitcase suddenly popped open, revealing the contents inside. It was a female torso. The torso had a small tattoo of a bow on the lower back, and from this, and later using DNA from a toothbrush, they were able to identify the body. It was a woman who had been reported missing several days ago. 29-year-old Gemma McCluskey. Gemma McCluskey was born on the February 5, 1983. As an adult, she lived with her mother Pauline and her 35-year-old brother Tony, a window cleaner, in a flat on Pelter Road in Shoreditch, London. Her mother had been seriously unwell. After going to hospital to remove a brain tumor, she had contracted MRSA. MRSA is commonly referred to as a superbug, as it's resistant to various antibiotics. She was also close to her father Anthony and her other brother Danny. Standing at just 4'11", her personality packed a huge punch. Her father said she was a great character and never heard anyone say anything negative about her. In 2000, Gemma was cast to star in one of the UK's most popular soap operas, EastEnders. She played the role of Carrie Skinner, great niece of the iconic character Ethel Skinner. She was in EastEnders until 2001, and starred in over 30 episodes. After her acting stint, she would begin working in a few pubs and clubs in Shoreditch. She was described as loud and the life and soul of the party. You always knew she was around, and she was never afraid to voice her opinion and have herself be heard. She was also on good terms with her ex-boyfriend Rafe. Although they had split when they were young, they remained in contact and had discussed getting back together several times. Gemma was caring and generous, particularly with money, and made time for anyone who needed her. So who would want to hurt her in such a brutal way and why? On Wednesday, February, she attended the opening of the Royal London Hospital in Whitechapel. As the daughter of a friend would be performing as part of the opening, Gemma had offered to film it. The following day, March 1, 2012, Gemma had seen her friend Erica, who lived in Mile End. A couple of days later, Gemma's friend Carly received a message on Facebook from a mutual friend, asking if she had seen Gemma. Carly explained that she hadn't, and asked what the problem was. She was told that Gemma had gone missing, and nobody had contact with her for a couple of days. Gemma had a big friendship group, and when she failed to reply to any of their calls or messages, concerns were raised even more. Gemma was working in a club on Kingsland Road at the time of her disappearance. Her brother Danny went to the club to speak to staff there, hoping they knew where she was. But just like everyone else, they too hadn't seen her. She was due to be on shift there, but had failed to turn up. Gemma was a full-time carer to her mother, supporting her through her various health issues. So her sudden disappearance without explanation was even more alarming. Saturday, March 3, 2012, Tony, Danny, and one of Gemma's friends went to the police station to report her as a missing person. As he had been the last known person to see her, Tony's accounts of her movements were vital. Tony gave 3 different answers, and couldn't remember when he'd last seen her. Danny became annoyed with his brother, believing his inability to give a straight answer was due to his long-standing drug abuse. His poor recollection as a result made it very hard for the detectives. Tony and Gemma were known to have a strange relationship. Anthony asked Tony if he and Gemma had had an argument on the 1st of March. Tony said that he had failed to turn off the bathroom taps, causing it to flood due to the amount of cannabis he had smoked, leaving Gemma incredibly annoyed and frustrated. When Gemma saw Erica on the 1st of March, they had talked about the argument over the flooded bathroom. Whilst there, Gemma had received a call from Tony, and there had been another argument, with Gemma telling him how disappointed she was in him. Erica would later say she was very annoyed, verging on angry. Her mother had left her in charge, and she was sick of him smoking so much. That's why he overflowed the bath. She wanted to chuck him out. I said, we'll give him another chance. Anyone can make a sort of accident. Give him one more warning, and leave it at that. But she was quite adamant. She seemed to have made her mind up. On the Saturday that she had been reported missing, Erica rang Tony. He told Erica that Gemma had been very annoyed at him flooding the bathroom, and so he'd gone to his room. He said that when he came down at 6 p.m., her keys were left on the table, but she was gone. When Erica spoke to him later, the stress of the situation was apparent. Tony was upset and crying, saying he had been struggling to eat and sleep properly. Erica invited him round, saying she would cook him dinner, to try and take his mind off it. But he declined, saying that if Gemma came home, he wanted to be there. To try and get the word out there about her disappearance, her friend contacted the local newspaper. Elsa Kvist was a reporter working for the East London Advertiser when the call came in. She said her ears pricked up when she heard that Gemma had been an actor on EastEnders. She decided to call Gemma's brothers. She said Danny was clearly emotional, whilst Tony was much calmer, unlike when he had spoken to Erica. On Monday, March 5th, the search efforts began in full force. Her cousins Nikki and Kiri organized searches to try and find her, and missing persons posters were being put up everywhere. The hashtag #FindGemma was circulating around social media as the search efforts ramped up to find her. Carly also began printing missing persons posters and leading search parties. She said she was in contact with Tony, who said he was sure his sister would be found safe and well. The case would then take a deeply disturbing turn. Whilst at the flat with family and friends as they awaited any news, Tony received a series of sinister phone calls on the March 6th. The first call told him that if he wanted to see Gemma alive, then £2 million needed to be taken to Benfleet International Station. The second call told him he also needed to bring $500 worth of Aracadina. And then the third call reiterated the demand for £2 million. When Tony asked to speak to his sister, the caller said that she was locked in a room, had been stripped of her clothes, and sexually assaulted. The calls were listened to on speakerphone by everyone there. Gemma's older brother Danny also received the same calls. The number had been withheld, but the police were able to trace it. The calls were traced to a 19-year-old, Sam Dunn in Kent, and on the March 8th the search warrant was executed for his home address, and Dunn was arrested. Despite the hopes that this was a strong lead, it was discovered that they were nothing more than a cruel hoax. Dunn had seen the phone numbers on the missing poster. In his interview with police, he said he was with his friends who were talking about calling the numbers on a missing persons appeal that they had seen on Facebook. He said that although he and others had shouted fake demands, he hadn't been the one to call the numbers. But this contradicted what the witnesses had heard on the calls. They had heard only one voice. He denied the charges, but would later change his plea to guilty. At Medway Magistrates Court, he was sentenced to 6 months in prison for 4 charges that would run concurrently. This hoax left everyone back at square one. One thing that had stood out to investigators and others was the contrast between Danny and Tony's behavior. Danny was out looking for his sister while Tony stayed home, saying he wanted to be there in case she returned. When Tony discovered that a national newspaper had picked up the story, then he came to join the search efforts. What was worrying for those who knew Gemma was that the tensions in the house had been growing as her brother had become increasingly addicted to a powerful cannabis strain called skunk, sometimes smoking between 15 and 20 joints a day. A psychiatrist, Professor Sir Robin Murray, described the effects of skunk in a documentary about Gemma's case, explaining that it can increase paranoia, and one can even display symptoms including auditory and visual hallucinations. Gemma and her mother had already made contact with the police regarding Tony's behavior, and he had, on 2 occasions, attempted to strangle Gemma. The police had been able to piece together a timeline of her last known movements. Gemma had left Erica's at 1:17 p.m. to head home. Her phone record showed 2 calls between the brother and sister. After the call had initially failed to connect, there was a brief conversation at 1:47 p.m., lasting just 8 seconds. At 1:50 p.m., CCTV showed her car arriving home. Just 18 minutes later, by 02:08 p.m., her phone had been switched off. This meant that the police needed to speak to Tony again. He showed an inability or an unwillingness to answer all the questions. Then, on the 6th of March, the news came in that nobody had wanted to hear a woman's torso had been found in a suitcase in the canal. It was later identified as Gemma McCluskey. DI John Nicholson, who was part of the investigation and a family liaison officer, was sent to Anthony's house, telling him that they had found a torso believed to be Gemma, leaving her family and friends completely broken and devastated. Following the gruesome discovery, D.I. Nicholson contacted a clinical forensic psychologist, Adrian West, to try and shed more light on the case. He said that homicides culminating with the dismemberment of the body are often committed by someone who knows the victim. Dismemberment normally always occurs at the same site that the murder took place, and usually the place that either the perpetrator, victim, or both of them live. Anthony said that there would be no funeral until all of her body parts were found. Danny had to break the news to their devastated mother, Pauline. She was unable to talk following an operation. He said she just kept mouthing the word no in disbelief. Tributes poured in for Gemma, with flowers and cards being left in her memory, including one by her heartbroken ex-boyfriend Rafe. As the investigation continued, on Wednesday, March 7th, the police made an announcement. An arrest had been made. Tony McCluskey was in custody on suspicion of murder. His refusal to answer only aroused suspicions further. A search of his phone records showed that the day after she had gone missing, he had sent a text to his girlfriend. He said that he was sorry he hadn't spoken to her the previous night. At 10:31 that morning, he had visited his mother in hospital. He also sent a text to his sister's phone saying, "Love ya, kiss kiss." Detectives would later discover that this was the only time he had told her on a text message that he loved her, but it wasn't genuine. It was part of his cover-up plot, texting her and pretending that she was still alive. It is believed that Gemma was murdered shortly after arriving home at 1:50 p.m. At 4:51, the day after she had gone missing, he sent another text to Gemma, along with the one saying he loved her. That read, "Gem, ring me when you get this message. What are you having for dinner? Are you working tonight? Kiss kiss." Then the police had a major breakthrough, the one that they had been looking for. They discovered that Tony had contacted a taxi company using the name Tom. The CCTV showed Tony dragging a heavy suitcase into the taxi. When the driver asked him what was in there, Tony said it was a sound system. He then asked to go to Dunstan Road, near Regent's Canal. The driver remembered how Tony had struggled to get the suitcase out of the car. The student was out on her balcony by Acton Lock, saw a man dragging a bag down by the water. Tests of the taxi revealed traces of Gemma McCluskey's blood. On Saturday, March 10th, Tony McCluskey was charged with murder. He was remanded in custody and appeared at the Old Bailey courthouse from Brixton Prison via a video link. There was no application for bail made. The disturbing evidence would continue to mount. A search was conducted of the flat that Gemma and Tony had shared, and blood drops were found in the bathroom. A knife was also found with blood stains on it. But what was unusual was, given the fact she had been dismembered, was there was no significant blood at the property, or in the drains or plug holes. However, a small part of human matter, coming from inside of Gemma's body, was found on the cabinet in the bathroom. Police theorized that some sort of material or plastic had been put under her body before the dismemberment, and then Tony had extensively cleaned up around her, accounting for the lack of blood at the crime scene. He was seen on CCTV on the Friday morning, the day after her murder, purchasing bin bags, cigarettes, and a newspaper. Gemma's legs were found by police divers over the following 2 weeks in plastic bags. A Scotland Yard spokesman said, "The Marine Support Unit recovered the legs from the canal on the Broadway Market stretch, where Ms. McCluskey's body was found. We are awaiting further tests to determine the identity of the limbs, but we believe it belongs to Gemma McCluskey." The arms were also found. Police were called at 9:35 on Monday to report of an arm being found in the Regent's Canal in Hackney. We await further tests to determine the identity, but at this stage it is believed to be connected to the murder of Gemma McCluskey. Although they had been weighted down, the gas emitted during the decomposition process had caused them to rise to the surface of the water. After Tony's arrest, D.I. Nicholson visited his father Anthony and showed him the CCTV footage. Anthony was adamant it was Tony in the footage. Following this, Tony told Anthony his version of what had happened that day. Tony said that Gemma had arrived home and was combative and argumentative, and demanding he leave the flat after the argument over the flooded bathroom. He said he had gone up the stairs, and when he had turned around, Gemma was standing there with a knife in her hand. After that, he said, he had no recollection. On Sunday, September 9th, Gemma's head was eventually found in the water by someone cleaning the canal. She was identified using dental records. The lacerations on the skull indicated that a blunt object had been used to hit her over the head at least twice, and she had likely died from a bleed on the brain. Experts believe that over the course of the 2 or 3 hours after the murder, a knife and meat cleaver had been used to dismember her body into 6 pieces. In November, Gemma's funeral was held. Many people came to pay their respects and celebrate her all-too-short life. The funeral gave her devastated loved ones the chance to come together and grieve, as they tried to come to terms with what had happened. Whilst being held at Highdown Prison in Surrey, Tony sent a letter to his father. It read in part, "I'm finding it very hard to believe myself that I could do such a terrible thing to you and our family. It breaks my heart knowing I could hurt you in such a way, Dad. Dad, you know me well enough to know that I'm not an evil person, and that wasn't me that done such a terrible thing. It chokes me up knowing I did. I wish I could tell you more, and I sit here day and night thinking nonstop. But I just can't remember what happened that day. I've always been the quiet one, the one that wouldn't hurt a fly, the one that would do anything for our family. I just hope you can forgive me. Monday, January 14th, 2013. The trial of Tony McCluskey began at the Old Bailey Courthouse in London. He denied murder, but admitted to manslaughter. He said that during an argument he had lost control and couldn't remember the series of events that had followed. When the horrific details about what had happened to Gemma were laid bare, and how her body was treated by her own brother, her father had to leave the courtroom unable to listen to any more. Tony McCluskey had initially used a knife to remove the limbs, but changed to a meat cleaver and dismembered her over the course of 2 to 3 hours. With each limb that was severed, he was becoming faster at doing it. When talking about the argument that they had had, Tony told the court she came up the stairs and was shouting, "Are you gonna go? Are you gonna go? Are you gonna go?" I turned around, and she was standing there with a knife in her hand. I got very angry. I just couldn't believe what I was hearing. All I remember is just grabbing her wrists. After that I have no recollection. An expert witness was brought in who refuted his claims of amnesia. Gemma's ex-boyfriend Rafe was there for the trial, and Tony McCluskey saw him in the courtroom and smiled at him. Rafe said he recognized me, and that smile to me was him saying, "Rafe, I know you know I did it." There was no remorse in those bulging eyes. They were just cold. He lied because he knew exactly what he'd done that night, and he planned to get away with it. Tony McCluskey's barrister suggested that Gemma had taken cocaine that day, something her friend Erica had denied, saying she didn't even smoke a cigarette, let alone drugs, never in her life. Mr. Crispin Eilert, the prosecution lawyer, said the defendant must have killed Gemma no doubt in the course of a quarrel. He then dismembered her body before disposing of the body parts, including the head, in the canal. For some time there had been tension between Miss McCluskey and her brother. To Gemma, this was largely as a result of the defendant's habitual use of cannabis, and its most toxic form, skunk. When talking about the flooded bathroom, Mr. Eilert said, "It is clear that Gemma regarded this incident as the last straw, and she wanted the defendant to move out." The court heard, however, the course of her life. Gemma had been mentally and physically abused by her brother. A witness would say he would beat her and mentally torture her, calling her all kinds of awful things. She would wear sunglasses because of the black eyes, and I saw bruises up her arms where he attacked her. The hoax calls were also brought up in court, with Mr. Eilert saying, "The truth is that the defendant could not have believed his luck." The calls can only have added to the state of confusion as to Gemma's whereabouts. After all the evidence had been presented, it was now time for the jury to deliberate, and on Wednesday, January 30th, they had reached their verdict. Tony McCluskey was found guilty of murder by an 11-1 majority. He was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 20 years. As the verdict was read out, McCluskey showed no reaction, while crying could be heard from the public gallery. Mr. Justice Fulford said, "I unhesitatingly reject your account, that she had used bad language towards you, or that she had belittled you in the past. She was a warm-hearted woman who was loved by a great many people." Mr. Justice Fulford also said that Tony had attempted to cover up his tracks in a cold-blooded way, saying, "Your hope must have been that she would never be found." I think we can hear from him now. The investigation into Gemma's death was challenging for all, no more so than for Gemma's family and her many friends. No one can imagine quite how horrific it must have been told that Gemma had been murdered and that her body had been dismembered, only later to be told that her brother was suspected of being the person who was responsible. The jury saw fit to completely dismiss his pathetic attempts and claims that he had amnesia during the period in which he had struggled with her, killed her, dismembered her, and ultimately disposed of her body. First of all, I'd like to say that my other son Danny could not make it here today because he's taken over the floor. This has been an extremely traumatic year for myself, my wife Carol, my son Danny and his partner Chantel, Gemma's extended family, and all their many friends. We would sincerely like to thank lead detective John Nicholson, Dave Suddick, and the Metropolitan Police and British Waterway units involved in the search for Gemma. Our thanks to Mark Warswick, our family agent officer, and Ms. Carly Sneed of the Victim Support Homicide Team for their support in every step of the way. Through such a difficult time, Gemma was a daughter, a sister, an auntie, a cousin, and a niece, and is very much loved and greatly missed. I'd also like to thank the media for allowing us privacy through this very trying time, and I'd just like to say good night. God bless Gemma. We all miss you and love you. Thank you. Tony McCluskey was sent to Balmarsh Prison, but was later moved to Nottingham's Lotham Grange Prison after a bounty was allegedly put on his head. His prison move was confirmed by the Ministry of Justice, who said people could be moved for all kinds of reasons, such as being closer to their family or for security. In an episode of Crimes That Shook Britain, Anthony explained that he had disowned his son. He said, "I said right at the start I would stand by him. I really did mean it, because I was going to lose 2 children, not 1. My sister said, 'Why are you saying that? How can you stand by him?' I said, 'He's my flesh and blood. I've got to stand by him.'" He also referred to the letters that his son had sent to him in prison. He said, "Every letter was the same. He's not showing no remorse, not an ounce of remorse. He doesn't mention her name. I'm trying to support and look after him, but he's not showing no remorse, and that was it. In the end I went, I've had enough Tony." The devastation caused by the murder of Gemma McCluskey is impossible to comprehend. Her ex-boyfriend Rafe said, "I know that Gemma would want me to think about those great memories, and I always will. She will always be the love of my life." More tragedy would strike the family in 2013. Gemma's mother, Pauline, whom Gemma had cared for through her various devastating health issues, passed away. There are only 2 people who know exactly what happened in the flat on Pelter Road that day. One can't talk, and the other refuses. Anthony's wife Carol said, "I've watched my husband slowly become a broken man. There has always been laughter in our house, but now it is very rare." Gemma McCluskey was a feisty and caring young woman. She gave so much of herself to others and was always there for anyone in need. It is only right that she be remembered for the joy and light that she brought to so many people, and not by the brutal and devastating way that her life was taken. Story 4. This case begins in the British town of Soham in Cambridgeshire in 2002. It's a fairly peaceful, rural, quiet market town with a population of just over 10,000 people. But the peace and tranquility of the town would be shattered one late afternoon in early August. News began to spread that 2 10-year-old girls were missing, and the search was on to find them. The events that had actually transpired in Soham that day would shock the small community, enrage the nation, and even travel across seas. This is the case of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman, 20 years on. Soham, Cambridgeshire. 2 of the families that called this town home were the Wellses and the Chapmans. 10-year-olds Holly Marie Wells and Jessica Amy Chapman, born to Kevin and Nicola and Les and Sharon respectively, were the closest of friends. They were playful, fun, and loved the outdoors, spending almost every day together, in school and out of it. Holly was a little quieter, and Jessica was a lot more outgoing. But they complemented each other perfectly. Everyone said they bounced off each other really well, never failing to make the other laugh, and never having any fights. One thing that made them closer still was their love of sports, and they would often watch and play football together. Sunday, August 4th, 2002. It was a swelteringly hot summer's day, and the girls had made plans to enjoy the weather and spend some time together. Jessica was recently back off a 2-week holiday, and the girls were definitely due a catch-up. Just before noon, Jessica left her house on Brook Street to go to Holly's for a barbecue. Holly lived nearby in Red House Gardens, around a 10-minute walk away. On holiday, Jessica had bought Holly a necklace with the letter H and 2 dolphins on it, and she carefully packed this to take with her. The girls and their friend Natalie played some games at Holly's, and listened to music for about half an hour before Natalie went home. Shortly after this, the 10-year-old changed into some Manchester United football shirts. One was Holly's, and the other was her brother Oliver's. The shirts had David Beckham's name on the back, their favorite football player. Just after 5 p.m., Holly asked her mother to take a picture of them wearing the shirts. The girls were beaming and clearly so happy to be reunited after 2 weeks apart. After this, everyone sat down to eat. Holly and Jessica then went back upstairs to Holly's room to carry on playing on the computer. A little after 6:15 p.m., they both left the house without mentioning it to anyone. Just before 6:30, CCTV in a car park outside a sports center captured the girls walking together, and it is thought that the direction they were going in was to one of the shops to buy some sweets. They then walked along a path which led to Soham Village College. At 6:33, they were spotted in the neighboring streets of College Road and College Close. At 8 p.m., the families, thinking the girls were upstairs, realized they were actually not in the house, and after a search of the area, Holly and Jessica were reported missing just before 10 p.m. Disappearance is incredibly out of character. They haven't been missing before. Very well balanced, very bright young girls. Everyone was rattled by the girls, and it seemed something was very wrong right from the beginning. They knew the area well, and most people knew them, so the idea that they had simply walked off and gotten lost seemed very unlikely. The community looked out for each other, and everyone was in agreement that if someone had seen them or recognized something was wrong, they would have stepped in to help. The police based their headquarters at the girls' school, and it's safe to say that the disappearance of the girls took over the media and was front-page news for most days. It's now the biggest investigation into missing children the force here has ever undertaken. The photo of the girls in their football shirts taken just hours before they had disappeared was released to the media, and is one we think many will remember. The search parties were huge and growing by the day, and people were traveling from everywhere to report on the case and help in any way they could. Police had looked over the girls' primary school, as well as the secondary school just down the road, Soham College. But nothing turned up. As the days passed, although police didn't say it, it was becoming clear that Holly and Jessica had probably been met with harm. This afternoon, both Holly's and Jessica's parents joined the police in making a desperate appeal for help. I don't allow her up the street on her own at all. At all. We don't allow her anywhere. On her own. They're both befriended. Jessica doesn't like the dark. We love them so much, we just want them home. Anyone who's got children must know what we're going through. Both sets of parents were adamant their daughters were taught that talking to or trusting strangers was not something they should do, and the head teacher of their school agreed, saying, "The possible danger from strangers is something we have impressed upon the children from an early age." This made the police think they had potentially been approached by someone they knew and possibly trusted. The reward for any information about the girls was now sat at a huge £1 million. Investigators questioned every registered sex offender in the Cambridgeshire and Lincolnshire area. Over 260 registered sex offenders from across the UK were also questioned, but all of them were eliminated. The girls' favorite player, David Beckham himself, even made a plea for their safe return, telling Holly and Jessica they weren't in any trouble, that their parents loved them and needed them home. One person that was keen to talk to police and share his story was the caretaker of the secondary school, Soham Village College, 28-year-old Ian Huntley, and he was someone that fast became a regular face in the media. Jeremy Thompson was the presenter for Sky News at the time, and he secured what would become widely circulated interviews. PM, the timeline on that Sunday night, the 4th of August, puts the girls here. Right in the forecourt of the Village College, the local education center. We know they'd been to the sports center just across the road a few minutes before to buy some sweets, and were carrying on walking through what would have been very familiar territory. Their primary school, St. Andrews, is just across the back of the Village College here. Seemed fine, very cheerful, happy, chatty. I didn't see anything untoward, nobody were hanging around, just seemed like normal, happy kids. Safe and well. Yeah, absolutely. And you may, as it turned out, have been the last person to actually chat to them before they vanished. Yeah, that's what it seems like. And it's a mystery? Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. Everybody around here, I've been speaking to a lot of people, and what they're saying is, while there's no news, then there's still that glimmer of hope. And that's basically all we're all hanging on to. And there was nothing that Sunday evening that gave you a glimmer of suspicion that anything was wrong. No, not at all. He declared himself to be probably one of the last known people who had seen the girls that day. Ian and his partner Maxine Carr lived together, having met in Grimsby in 1999. They then moved to Soham for their jobs in 2001. 25-year-old Maxine was actually a teaching assistant at the girls' primary school. Holly and Jessica adored her and would often draw her pictures and write her notes. A month before, in July, Maxine applied for a full-time teaching assistant position at the school. But she was unsuccessful. Holly had burst into tears when she had found out, and gave her a hand-drawn card which read, "I'll miss you a lot. Thank you. See you around school. Miss you. Love, Holly." Well, it's been probably the worst night so far from last night. We've had inexperienced friends and family searching in ditches, in rivers, looking for shallow graves for our children. What started as someone wanting to tell the media their story quickly became a problem for Ian. Everyone now wanted an interview with him, and he started asking the reporters to make sure the footage of him stayed local. It doesn't help the fact that I was one of the last people to speak to them, if not the last person to speak to them. I keep reliving that conversation, and thinking perhaps something different could have been said, perhaps kept them here a little bit longer, and maybe changed events. Share somewhere there's going, or anything which stops all this from happening. Your neighbors, think about your neighbors, who's to the left of you, who's to the right, and think of any strange behavior or anything like that, and I think it's a very good idea. It's very frustrating knowing that we have people that way inclined amongst us, and us not knowing who they are. It's just very upsetting, and to think that I might be the last friendly face that these two girls had to speak to. I don't want any of the national press to have a hold of this interview. I'm doing this just for local television, as I believe the children are still local, and it's only relevant really to the local areas. It's not going to be in the national interest to hear what I've got to say really. Police retraced the last known steps of the missing 10-year-olds. Girls dressed in identical clothes followed the route Jessica and Holly took 6 days ago. Detectives now say there is no evidence that Holly and Jessica went to meet someone they contacted in an internet chat room. Clarence Mitchell reports from Soham. Taking their walk towards the unknown, these are the last identified steps of Holly and Jessica. Recreated by two young girls from a drama company in Cambridge, they were wearing identical clothing and jewelry to the missing 10-year-olds. Their Manchester United shirts the same, along with their sports trousers. Their hair too styled as closely to Holly and Jessica's as possible. They aimed to jog people's memories of last Sunday. Starved to 6 o'clock, they were seen a number of times in nearby Sand Street, heading towards the local sports center, where they were caught on CCTV cameras. And at 6:45, the pair were spotted in the area around the War Memorial in the High Street. All the locations were based on confirmed sightings of Holly and Jessica. Detectives are hoping it'll lead to a breakthrough. There may be members of the public out there who don't realize that they have seen something significant, or if they have seen something don't think it's important to us, and I will appear to those people after they've seen the reconstruction to please contact us. Having examined the girls' computer, detectives now say there's no evidence they were using chat rooms, or had arranged to meet anyone just before they vanished. Around the reconstruction, the intense searching continued. Soham's drains a new focus for specialist police search officers. This evening, the hunt for the girls and whoever may be holding them is about to widen in circles stretching miles across the spaces of the Cambridgeshire Fens. But the girls are still missing despite one of the biggest manhunts Britain has seen. Clarence Mitchell is in Soham's now. Clarence, how confident are police that they will get new leads following today's reconstruction? Sophie, the police are very hopeful indeed. They've brought in extra officers to handle the calls from the public that they're hoping will come in. But the full scale of it won't be clear probably until sometime tomorrow. And that's why they're hoping that vital clue that will lead to the breakthrough will come from the reconstruction. They believe the girls are still alive, are probably being held together, and very much against their will. This led to thousands of calls coming in with tips and leads. The small and usually fairly quiet police station was becoming overwhelmed, and Detective Chief Superintendent Chris Stevenson was asked to take over the investigation. He said the first thing he did, as unusual as it sounded, was scale things right back. He explained that the case had traveled so quickly across the nation, they needed to change their focus and start at the beginning, local and close to the girls' homes. A full look at Holly and Jessica's last known steps were looked at again, and this time far more thoroughly. Everything was a fairly quick walk away from the girls' homes. The pair lived just around the corner from each other, and a short distance from their primary school, with lots of little shops along the route. They wouldn't have any reason to venture too far out. Detectives had interviewed many people by this point, and the overwhelming consensus was not one single person had seen the girls anywhere past College Close, the road that Ian and Maxine had lived on. There was no more footage, no witnesses, and simply no trace of them past that point. Following the route that had been already mapped out on CCTV, and with the help of a forensic engineer looking at where Jessica's phone had pinged off the towers, the team narrowed a lot down. The forensic engineer determined that Jessica's phone had been manually switched off sometime after 6:37 p.m., and the phone tower it had last hit was just by Soham Village College, and close to Ian and Maxine's house. It was fast becoming obvious to the investigating team that Ian Huntley, at the very least, knew more than he was saying, and at the most and worst, he was somehow involved. His face was a regular fixture in the news, and the pressure of the press was getting to him. As the police continued to monitor him, they noticed he was starting to lose weight and had deep bags under his eyes. At one point, he broke down to the officers going door to door in his area, crying, "And am I a suspect?" You think I did it, don't you? Maxine Carr was also talking to the media and joining in the searches for her young students. And just as Ian was now facing scrutiny, so was she. Again, Jeremy Thompson got the scoop. You knew the girls, what were they like? Lovely, walking, laughing. They were happy and sorry. There was nothing wrong with them. They weren't upset or anything like that. They were so funny, brilliant, and kind to everybody. They wouldn't say a bad word about anybody. They loved their families and everything, which is why nobody believes that they would ever run away. They were very close to all their family. This is something I'll probably keep for the rest of my life, I think. It's what Holly gave me on the last day of term. She was very, very upset because I didn't get my job, and she just gave me this with a poem on the inside saying to a special teaching assistant, really, and we'll miss her a lot, and we'll see her in the future. That's the kind of girl she was. She was just lovely, really lovely. That's really very sweet, isn't it? Yeah. Maxine, thanks for taking the time to talk to us. That was very kind. As soon as the interview was over, Jeremy's producers turned to him and said, that was odd, wasn't it? Didn't she refer to them in the past tense? They rolled the tape back and sure enough, she had, which Jeremy Thompson said was a little chilling. That's the kind of girl she was. She was just lovely, really lovely. Although eyebrows with reporters and police were raised, it still wasn't enough to confirm anything. One officer recalled that as they were conducting their door-to-door inquiries, Ian leisurely slumped over the side of the door of the police car, very casually, without a care in the world. He asked just one question, how long DNA stayed around for, and a detective noted 3 fairly big scratches on his face, but he quickly told them it had come from playing with his dog. Ian Huntley's inability to stay out of the media, and the investigation meant that people from back in his hometown of Grimsby soon saw his face and recognized him. Peter Craig, a reporter for the Grimsby Telegraph, started receiving calls from the locals, and they had some dark stories about Ian's past that they thought were relevant and wanted to share. It turned out that Ian had a long list of offenses, both confirmed and alleged, which included 9 allegations of rape, indecent assault of underage girls, and harming animals. By his own admission, he had had many sexual encounters with teenage girls, and girls as young as 11 had reported that he had sexually assaulted them. As none of the cases had gone to trial, this was not reflected in a criminal record. But the Grimsby Telegraph knew they couldn't simply sit on this information. Ian Huntley was someone who needed to be looked at. The more that came out about his past, the darker the situation was looking. In 1994, he had met a woman called Claire, and within weeks after a whirlwind romance, the pair married. She spoke of his aggressive nature and terrible temper, saying she was in fear for her life the whole time. She wanted a divorce, but Ian Huntley refused, and it took 5 long years for it to finally go through. In 1998, he groomed a 15-year-old called Emma, and she moved into his mother's house with him shortly after. When social services caught wind that this was happening, they started an investigation, but he told her to lie, and it didn't go any further. When Ian found out that Emma was pregnant, he threatened to kill her. Emma finally escaped the relationship after suffering a miscarriage, and went on to speak about how guilty she felt for lying to everyone. He soon met a lady named Katie, and she too was subjected to a tirade of abuse. She also fell pregnant, but she managed to flee the abusive relationship to raise her daughter Samantha. Whilst all of this was going on, Ian was still married to Claire. But finally, in 1999, they divorced and Claire found love with Ian's younger brother Wayne. Everyone in the Grimsby area was talking about it. They all knew of Ian Huntley's perversions and were shocked that nothing was happening about it. After he met Maxine, the pair moved 2.5 hours away to Soham in the hopes he could avoid his past and start over with no one ever finding out. Their relationship had started off well, and she told people she was head over heels. Ian was romantic and caring, buying her gifts and flowers, but her sister recognized it as love bombing, which is when someone is showered with excessive attention and gifts with the aim of making them feel dependent. The relationship quickly soured. Ian soon became violent and controlling, just as he had done with his past partners, and the neighbors had often heard him being physically and verbally abusive to Maxine. With everything they were uncovering, as well as everything they already suspected, police asked Ian and Maxine to come in for a voluntary interview, which lasted about 7 hours. Maxine said that she had been at home with Ian on the night in question, and went into a lot of inane detail about the day. In Ian's interview, he was the exact opposite, staying silent for huge periods of time. At one point, he was asked what Holly was wearing and what she looked like, and he didn't speak for almost a minute. But it turned out that Maxine had been out in Grimsby on August 4th, and not at home with Ian. This not only proved her whole story was a lie, but it also meant that Ian now didn't have an alibi at all. But the pair were soon released, as although the police had a lot of circumstantial evidence, it just wasn't enough to hold or arrest them. Although the school that Ian had worked at had already been searched once, Chris Stevenson ordered another one, as he was convinced that if there was any evidence, it would be there. During the first search, Ian had actually led the officers around, but it was becoming clear that he had most likely led them away from certain areas. After an extensive search, finally, the team found something concrete. Inside a yellow bin was a black bag, and after the bag was removed, the charred and cut-up remains of 2 red football shirts were found at the bottom. There was no doubt who the shirts had belonged to, and what this finding meant. When Chris Stevenson got the call, he cried, describing it as a watershed moment, and the impact this had on him would last a lifetime. He knew they had enough to arrest them both on suspicion of abduction, and despite there being no bodies, murder as well. In the last few hours, a 28-year-old man and a 25-year-old woman have been arrested. The 28-year-old man has been arrested for the murder and abduction of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman. The 25-year-old woman has been arrested for the murder of both girls. They've been taken to separate police stations in Cambridgeshire, where they will be interviewed. As soon as he was arrested, Ian called his mother's house. His brother Wayne said his mum Linda answered the phone. All he would say was that he was on the outskirts of Cambridge, and that the police had put him there. Linda felt it in her gut and bluntly asked him, "Did you do it?" Ian took a long pause and then said, "I love you, Mum." In that moment, they all knew that he was responsible for whatever had happened to Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman. Ian and Maxine were put in separate safe houses, while more searches were carried out. Every room in their house on College Close had been meticulously cleaned, and there appeared to be no trace of anything there. Ian's car was also forensically examined. Detectives noticed that the car had 4 brand new tires. The lining in the back had been replaced, and small traces of a mixture of brick dust and concrete were found on the underside of the car. Police tracked down the place that had fitted the new tires, and the employee said that Ian had asked that all 4 be changed, despite there being nothing wrong with them. He had also paid him £10 to put a false number plate on their books when it came to logging the job. And this all happened just one day after Holly and Jessica had gone missing. Maxine Carr suddenly and dramatically changed her story, admitting that she had lied to protect Ian. She said it was because she knew about his past, and didn't want him to be falsely accused of anything. And for someone so keen to talk to the media, Ian Huntley was now behaving very differently in his interviews. He spent the whole time rocking back and forth, saying he didn't understand the questions and didn't want to be there. Police were left with no choice but to send him for a mental health check. Outside of the interview rooms, the searches continued. Although most people understood the girls wouldn't be coming home alive, many still refused to believe it. With no real clues as to where the children are and what state they're in, searching these vast areas of Fenlands is difficult. So these friends of Holly's parents have chosen an area close to the A10 Cambridge Road, where the 2 girls were reportedly last seen. It's the helplessness, but as long as there's something to look for, we just never give up hope. Almost 2 weeks since the girls had last been seen, the search for Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman came to a crashing halt, snatching away the little bit of hope that people had been clinging onto. A member of the public found 2 small decomposing bodies, lying side by side in some thick woodland. The discovery of 2 bodies by a member of the public at lunchtime today. They were near an RAF base at Lake and Heath, about 12 miles away from where the girls had lived. Although testing needed to be done to confirm the identities, it was clear that it was Holly and Jessica. Fear and mourning gripped southern England, where authorities say 2 bodies found in a rural area are almost certainly those of 2 missing 10-year-old girls. 2 suspects are being held on suspicion of killing 10-year-old Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman. The suspects haven't been charged yet. Police spoke with the media just a short while ago about the case. It is almost exactly 2 weeks since Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman disappeared from this town, sparking a massive inquiry to find them. It is with great sadness that I have to tell you the following news. It may be some days yet before we are able to positively identify the 2 bodies found at Common Grove near Lake and Heath in Suffolk yesterday lunchtime. However, we are certain, as we possibly can be tonight, that they are those of Holly and Jessica. Holly and Jessica's families have been told this terrible news. Hundreds of CERN's people came to the church, desperate to make sense of the appalling events which have left this town in turmoil. Just 7 days ago, The congregation here prayed that the two 10-year-olds were safe somewhere. We cannot even begin to imagine how harrowing this nightmare must be for them. This community is still in an agony of self-doubt about how anything so dreadful could have happened in their midst, and there are many questions that are still unanswered. The sense of sadness was felt throughout the nation, and Jeremy Thompson, who had conducted the now infamous interviews, said that it was a very dark day to be a reporter. Someone else said you could feel the quietness of the town and sense of foreboding. DNA testing soon confirmed that it was the two 10-year-olds. Due to the decomposition and the fact that in an attempt to be made to burn their bodies, an exact cause and time of death could not be determined, but it was thought that it was likely asphyxiation. Pathological evidence indicated that at least one of the girls had been subjected to a sexual assault either before or after her death, but it simply couldn't be determined with absolute certainty. An officer looking after the site where they were found said he pushed for the girls' parents not to go and see them in that way. Having seen them himself, he knew it would cause immense pain because of the state they were in. A somber feeling gripped the nation. In the days after they were found, in honor of the sporty girls, all football matches in the UK held a minute's silence in their memory. A moment of silence was held just before kickoff at the Premiership game between Chelsea and Manchester United. David Beckham scored one goal during this match, which he later dedicated to the girls who had looked up to him so much. England cricket captain Nasser Hussain and coach Duncan Fletcher sent cards to the families expressing their deepest sympathies, and the Australian Prime Minister John Howard even sent a gift too. Everyone was paying tribute in whatever way they could, and one group of boys who were unable to afford flowers left their football for them, which was covered in messages they had written themselves. No forensic evidence could be retrieved from Holly and Jessica's bodies, but experts were still waiting for samples to come in from the clothing found in the bin, and they were hoping that this would be the link they needed. Finally, the tests were back. Fibers on the red shirts matched fibers on Ian Huntley's clothes and boots, and the bin liner that had been placed on top of the clothes also had his DNA on it. And the testing done on the area where the girls were found gave further links too. Experts confirmed that the brick dust, chalk and small bits of concrete found on the outside of Ian's car was a match to the road that led to where they were found. The police finally had enough. Just after 4 a.m., Ian Huntley was charged with 2 counts of murder, and Maxine Carr was also charged with perverting the course of justice and 2 counts of assisting an offender. As Ian Huntley was driven away, the public's outrage was clear to see. Jeremy Thompson said he had become such a figure of public hatred, and the disgust people felt for him was immeasurable. Officers then informed Maxine that Ian had been charged with 2 counts of murder. His fingerprints had been found. He wanted facts, and he wanted to know about the forensic side. A service is to be held at Ely Cathedral later this afternoon to honor Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman. The murdered girls' parents will join police and residents of their hometown of Soham to the service, which is by invitation only. The cathedral's dean describes it as a celebration of Holly and Jessica's lives. One of the great fears had been up until this stage that the 2 schools at the center of this tragedy, Boston Andrews School, which Holly and Jessica both attended, and also the local secondary school, the Soham Village College, because they'd been closed off as police crime scenes up until now, might not have been able to open in time. Now we heard this morning from the headmaster that not only will they be opening at an appropriate moment, but also he's hoping that it will prove something of a new beginning for these traumatized children. The first few days of term will be different as children and staff gather for the first time since these terrible events unfolded. Children and staff will be affected in different ways, and we should be sensitive to the needs of individuals, and where counseling is needed, it will be provided. As anger poured out onto the streets, Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman were finally laid to rest. A poem for Holly, entitled Soham's Rose. Your right to grow, to mature and to play, so cruelly denied in a sinister way. Attentive and caring, a parent's delight, but so young at heart, needing comfort at night. The garden is quiet, the house is too, but pausing for a moment, we can still sense you. Your trusting nature and desire to please all, allow us, your family, to remain walking tall. Our memories, now shared with the nation's hearts, small crumbs of comfort, now it is time to part. We will never forget you. Heaven's gain as it knows is simply you, Holly, our beautiful Soham Rose. The best friends were buried right next to each other, so they could stay just as close as they always were. Ian was still being held in a secure hospital, and all hearings were put on hold. Police were convinced that Ian was feigning his mental health issues, but waited patiently on the judge to make a decision about whether or not he was fit to stand trial. Maxine often wrote to him in hospital, telling him that she still loved him. But, by December 2002, she stopped communicating with him completely. To the relief of the police and the prosecution, after 50 days of evaluations by experts, the judge ruled that Ian Huntley was fit to stand trial. He was moved from hospital into prison. Both he and Maxine entered pleas of not guilty, and the trials got underway in November 2003 at the Old Bailey Courthouse in London. To this day, it remains unclear how or why Ian Huntley lured the girls into his house. But it is thought that he abused the trust and love they had for Maxine as their teaching assistant, and he probably promised the girls that they could see her inside. The girls may have also known him personally, or well enough to feel comfortable with him, as he was their teaching assistant's partner and worked just a short walk away from their school. Minutes before Holly and Jessica walked past his house that day, he had had a heated argument with Maxine, in which he accused her of cheating before slamming the phone down, and was thought he may have killed the girls in a rage-filled, spur-of-the-moment attack. Others believed it was premeditated and sexually motivated. But, with only one person's word, the full truth will likely never be known. It is thought that after he got them inside, he locked the doors. What happened after this has never been confirmed, but he ultimately smothered one of them before chasing the other around, and doing the same thing to her. But, in court, Ian Huntley now had a new story to tell. He testified in his own defense, and said that he had killed the girls, by accident, asking for people to consider manslaughter instead. He said that Holly and Jessica had come inside, seeking help for a nosebleed that Holly had. He took them up to the bathroom, where the bath was filled with water, from when he had been cleaning his dog. Ian said he had slipped and accidentally knocked Holly into the bath, resulting in her drowning. He went on to say that when Jessica started screaming, he accidentally suffocated her as he was trying to stifle her cries. Ian claimed that he had not feigned insanity, saying that the trauma of accidentally killing them had genuinely caused parts of his memory to disappear. Unsurprisingly, the prosecution said this story was nothing short of completely ridiculous, and he was someone that simply wanted to control the narrative until the very end. Maxine Carr also testified in her own defense. She said that at first she had thought that Ian had been having an affair, as the bedding had all been washed when she arrived home. She was asked why she had proceeded to help him clean the house so thoroughly, but she simply said that she was obsessive about keeping things tidy. She was adamant she was only lying to police about her location, because she feared that Ian would be targeted for something he didn't do. She also said that when Ian told her about the nosebleed, she had tried to convince him to tell the officers, saying that they would understand. Maxine said if she had known the full truth, she would never have done what she did. It was recognized that Maxine had faced various issues in her life. Some argued that these troubles meant that she was also a vulnerable target for Ian, whereas others are convinced she played an equally damning role and shouldn't be seen as a victim. Tony Rogers, the assistant chief constable at the time, said he believes that she is as evil and calculated as Ian himself and deserves no sympathy. Needless to say, as the trial drew to a close, the prosecution described both Maxine and Ian as accomplished liars. They said, "We invite you to reject the accounts of both deaths being accidental as desperate lies, the only way out for him. We suggest that this whole business and the house was motivated by something sexual, but whatever he initiated plainly went wrong. Therefore, in this ruthless man's mind, both girls had to die in his own selfish self-interest." They went on to say that Maxine was making the best out of the situation she was in, and that this involved protecting Ian Huntley at all costs. The defense kept it short, simply asking the jury to consider returning a verdict of manslaughter instead of murder. But this was not to be, as in December 2003, Ian Huntley was found guilty of both counts of murder and was sentenced to 2 terms of life imprisonment, with a minimum of 40 years to be served in custody. He avoided a mandatory life sentence, as the passing of the Criminal Justice Act 2003 had come into effect just 1 day after his conviction. Maxine Carr was also jailed, and got 3.5 years for perverting the course of justice, but she was released under a new identity less than 6 months later. At his sentencing, the Welsers and the Chapmans addressed the media, and Les Chapman said, "I think he was a time bomb waiting to go off, and both our girls were in the wrong place at the wrong time. I hope the next time I see him it will be like we saw our daughters, and it will be in a coffin." After the trial was over, questions surrounding how Ian Huntley was ever able to gain a job as a caretaker in a school were asked. And this prompted the Bouchard Report, a public inquiry into child protection, headed by Sir Michael Bouchard, to be put together. Ian Huntley had lied about everything, including his last name, and what he told the school was not checked or cross-referenced before he was hired. It also came to light that Maxine Carr had falsified her grades to get into the primary school as a teaching assistant, and this was not picked up on either. The Bouchard Report made a list of recommendations which would hopefully prevent anything like this happening again. A brand new police database was set up, which allows for different police forces to share information about offenders. Ian Huntley continues to face attacks in prison, including having boiling water poured on him and his throat being slit. He has also taken several overdoses since his sentence started. The Soham killer is set to sue the prison services after being attacked with a razor blade by one of his fellow inmates. Huntley needed hospital attention after his throat was slashed by an inmate at Franklin Prison in County Durham. He says that prison officers failed in their duty of care. It's not the first time that Huntley's been attacked. Another inmate threw boiling water over him at Wakefield Prison in 2005. He is not eligible for parole until 2042, by which time he would be 68 years old. But whether he is ever granted parole at all is another question. Many agreed that Ian Huntley was his own undoing. By the time he had killed Holly and Jessica, he was already a callous, dangerous, and narcissistic criminal, and his desperate need to stay in the media and the investigation, gaining attention and minor fame, says everything about his character. In 2004, Ian's parents said he had finally admitted that killing Jessica wasn't an accident, but they were still trying to get him to tell the full truth about both girls. His dad said, "We sat him down, and we're about 80% there. We found out what happened to Jessica. We've spent months trying to persuade him to tell the truth." They said they would continue to persist so that the Wells and the Chapmans could gain some sense of closure. That same year, the now infamous house, 5 College Close, was demolished, and it is now just a patch of grass. Kevin Holly's father became a founding patron of the charity, Grief Encounter, and then ran the London Marathon to raise money for them. Kevin said that the strain of going through what they did almost led to the end of his and Nicola's marriage, and took a couple of years to find each other again. But today, they are as strong as ever. We still think of Holly every day. We have pictures of her in and around the house. But it's not a shrine. We don't live in the past, he said. The Wells family moved out of their house in 2006 to escape some of the pain associated with it, but continued to rent it out, believing that one day they would move back, which in 2012 they did. It is understood that the Chapman family are also still in Soham, but since the trial came to an end, they have rarely spoken publicly or been in the media. The hunt for Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman was one of the largest searches in Britain's history. It involved more than 400 officers across 21 forces, with more than 14,000 calls being made to police in the 2 weeks that they were searching. To have it come to such a terrible end left a community and nation deeply affected. What started as any other summer's weekend for two 10-year-old best friends simply heading out to buy sweets in an area they knew, around people and neighbors they trusted, ended in the worst and most frightening tragedy imaginable. And today, 20 years on, the feelings about what happened that August afternoon are still strong, as we remember the lives of Holly Marie Wells and Jessica Amy Chapman. Story 5, Clear Lake City, Texas in May 2003, Tiffany Rowell and Rachel Calarudes, among many other people, proudly graduated from their high school. They were entering the next stage of their lives and had many summer plans with friends and family. Tiffany was off to become a social worker, and Rachel was thinking of joining the military. Tiffany's boyfriend of 3 years, Marcus, also had a place at college, and his cousin Adelbert, who had recently moved to Clear Lake for a fresh start, had big plans too. After Tiffany's mother had died, her father remarried and moved out of the area. Tiffany stayed in the house, so she didn't have to change schools so close to graduation. The next month and a half involved a lot of parties at Tiffany's, holding down jobs, saving up for college, and spending as much of the summer together as possible, before they all went their separate ways for a while. Late afternoon, July 18, 2003, police received a call from 2 neighbors who had gone to visit Tiffany. They had walked into her house and found a traumatizing scene, one that no one could have predicted. For people lay dead, the floor and walls were covered in blood, and it was obvious that they had all been deceased for several hours already. It was a shocking sight for even the most tenured of police officers. The victims were 18-year-olds Tiffany Rowell and Rachel Calarudes, Tiffany's boyfriend, 19-year-old Marcus Priscilla, and Marcus' cousin, 21-year-old Adalbert Sanchez. Tiffany, Marcus, and Adalbert had all been shot to death, and although Rachel had been shot multiple times, she had died of blunt force trauma to her head, and her skull was completely shattered. There was no forced entry, the TV was still blaring, and the way the group had been found indicated it was a total ambush that had happened in a mere matter of seconds. Rachel was found on the floor with her hand near her phone. She had managed to hit the 911 buttons to try and call for help, but before any call could go through, she was hit over the head, likely with a gun, and died. There was a clump of hair in her right hand, and she had been shot at least 12 times. Tiffany and Adalbert were on the recliners, their legs stretched out while they had been relaxing watching television, and Marcus was found behind the seats on the floor. Over 40 bullets had been fired in the house, and there was a mixture of 2 different shell casings. No guns were found at the scene, but police could tell that one was a 9mm and one was a .38 caliber. So investigators felt confident they were looking for at least 2 people involved, maybe even more. As the media got hold of the story and news began to spread, Rachel's father George recognized the address on television and headed straight over with his wife. The cameras picked up the heartbreaking moment. He pleaded with the police to let him in, but, as it was now a crime scene, it was simply not allowed. "Sir, you step behind that white line. You're going to be caught. You're going to jail right now. All right? Please. Please. I know. Please. I know. Please. Let's go." They both collapsed to the ground, waiting for someone to tell them something, but knowing deep down they wouldn't see their daughter alive again. It was disturbing and shocking that something like this could happen in broad daylight, in a neighborhood where very little went on. Former classmates of Tiffany said that her home had quickly become known as a party house, with drinking and drugs, and often lots of people coming in and out, especially now that it was summer break. So they wondered if maybe an alcohol or drug-fueled party had become really out of control. That's not what this particular day had been. The 4 were the closest of friends, and for all intents and purposes, it had just been a very casual afternoon for them, watching television and eating food. Friends, students, and neighbors gathered together for vigils, and a sense of unease hovered over everyone. 18-year-old Tiffany always had the biggest smile on her face. As well as wanting to go into social work, she was a talented actress and loved any chance to perform. Rachel Calarudes also loved the arts and creative writing, and was very popular in school due to her kind nature. People said that she too was always smiling, happy and fun to be around. Marcus' stepfather said Marcus loved nothing more than working on his car and spending time with his family and Tiffany. He had been finishing a course for an automotive technology certificate and wanted to pursue a business degree. His cousin Adalbert had moved to Clear Lake to get away from violence on the north side, and had only been there for a couple of weeks before he was killed. He loved making music and planned to go to college to study computer technology. People could not believe that something this brutal could happen to them, and this seemingly random crime had rattled the community. Sadly, there really were no witnesses. No one had heard any gunshots. The houses were very separated, and police said lots of people had their air conditioning and fans on. Could have blocked out the noise. But a couple living nearby had seen something they thought might be relevant. They had seen a very young man and a woman walking down the street at about 2:30 p.m. that day, and to the best of their knowledge, they hadn't seen them before. They were dressed all in black. The woman was wearing a bandana, carrying a big black bag, and the neighbors described her as very pretty with big eyes. The witnesses gave the best description they could to the renowned forensic artist Lois Gibson, who worked with what they could remember, putting together a potential profile. But whether these people were in any way linked was really unclear. Just 2 hours later, Lois had completed the sketches. George, Rachel's father, started working non-stop to try and raise money, so they could afford to put the sketches out on billboards, and spent most of his time going door-to-door handing out flyers. Early on, rumors began to swirl that Marcus had been involved in dealing drugs, and maybe this was behind the ambush. It was also alleged that Marcus' family had connections to the Mexican mafia, and perhaps the other 3 had been collateral damage to a completely unrelated thing. A close friend of Tiffany's said, "I know Marcus was messed up with some bad people." But Marcus' aunt said he struggled, but he succeeded. No matter how hard he was trying, he was doing the best to do good. One detective said they were all very young, very immature, and on their own for the first time. The 4 may have exercised bad judgment at times, but certainly didn't deserve what happened to them. Officers simply couldn't find anything to solidify the claims about the mafia, and this theory was eventually ruled out. Police did wonder, however, if drugs were involved somehow, but they just didn't have anything yet that pointed to that, as both drugs and cash were found at the scene in plain view. So why hadn't they been stolen? The attack had been so ruthless and felt so personal. Police then started to wonder if it was someone close to the group. Amongst her multiple shots, Rachel had been shot in the crotch area, and psychiatrists wondered if this was a sign of sexual envy or jealousy. But they were ruling people out at a rapid speed, rather than adding any suspects to the list. There was simply no one they could link to the group that would have any motive to do this. Time was slowly ticking by, and investigators had no more than they did when they first started. As the weeks turned into months, the months soon turned into years. Their confidence in catching whoever was responsible was dwindling. Fast forward to the summer of 2006, almost 3 years to the day after the shootings. After following leads that went nowhere and interviewing hundreds of people, police finally had a breakthrough. An anonymous tip came in via Crime Stoppers. The person on the end of the phone said they had seen the billboard and gave the police 2 names. The first was Christine Pialala, and the second was Chris. The tipster had met Christine in rehab as she was battling a heroin addiction. She had recently split from this mystery man called Chris, and was seemingly trying to turn her life around. While in rehab, she made a comment about her ex-boyfriend shooting up a house and killing a group of people, and she had also participated. He didn't know if the story was true, or if it was the drugs talking, but after seeing the billboard for himself, he decided to call in. A look into the name Christine Pialala told the police a lot. It turned out that Christine had gone to Clear Lake High School, alongside Tiffany and Rachel, and the connection started to be made. Those in Christine's life said that she had had a tough time in school, and was subjected to relentless bullying and attacks from classmates. Her mother and stepfather said that she had been diagnosed with alopecia when she was very young and began wearing wigs, which were frequently ripped off her head by other students. Her mom, Lori, said she had poor vision, so she had what I guess most folks would know as Coke bottle glasses. This, as well as her wearing wigs, meant she faced ridicule on a daily basis. Her mother said that one day Christine came home from school and said, "Mom, I made 2 new friends who are the sweetest girls I ever met, Rachel and Tiffany." None other than Rachel Caloritis and Tiffany Rowell. People said that the 2 almost took Christine under their wings, forming a genuine and tight friendship. Rachel and Tiffany started looking out for her, trying their best to protect her from the bullying. Christine's mom said she couldn't speak highly enough about them, how much fun they were, how loving they were, how they had so much fun. Every minute they spent together was lively and fun, and they laughed all the time, and I saw such a change in her personality. Rachel's father also knew of Christine, and said Rachel was the kind of person that always looked out for the underdog, always tried to help others. Rachel even kept a photo of Christine in her purse. On the back of the picture, Christine had written, "Damn, we've had some crazy memories, I love you." The 3 teens would often write notes back and forth to each other in class. And Lori recalled that Christine trusted them both so much, she felt okay without the wig on, which is not something she did with many of her friends. The trio would spend hours after school doing each other's makeup and trying on different wigs, having fun, but also making Christine feel comfortable and confident. The girls pushed Christine to try new things and find her creativity, and with this, Christine's confidence began to grow, and she was really coming into her own. She got a huge boost when she was voted Miss Irresistible by the student body at Clear Lake High School. She finally felt like she was leaving her past behind. Christine soon met Chris Snyder. He was 2 years older than her, and the pair struck up a friendship. Lori said she immediately disapproved of this, but said her daughter wouldn't hear anything bad said about him. Chris ended up serving time for armed robbery, and when he got out, he went straight back to Christine, who is now 16 years old. Christine said that she felt bad, because nobody wanted to be associated with him, and knowing how this felt, she stuck by him. They soon became romantically involved, and Christine had become more and more distant from her family. Lori said Christine clung on to him for reasons she didn't understand, despite him often joining in with the bullying. Chris was using a lot of drugs at the time, and before long, so was Christine. Her parents spoke to lawyers and the police, even trying to get a restraining order against him, but Christine was now almost 18 years old, and was making her own decisions. Her stepfather said she felt she was going to be able to fix him, no matter what he did. But others said that the toxicity came from both of them, with people often seeing Christine hitting him, and shouting and fighting in public. Although this relationship was already on a downward spiral, two people that seemed to be constantly positive and have good energy in her life were Rachel and Tiffany, who stayed just as close to her throughout her relationship with Chris. On the day the group were found dead, Lori said Christine had come home in floods of tears, crying through most of the night. She said she was so upset she couldn't attend their funerals. So, with the police knowing all of this, it begged the question, why would someone that was so close to the victims do something like that? How could Christine possibly have been involved? The only person that could answer that question was her, and officers started searching for Christine Pialala and Chris Snyder. The hunt for Chris proved harder, as he was not living at his last known address. But, thanks to ATM and bank records, Christine and her husband Justin were located. They were hauled up in a San Antonio motel, having lived there for almost a year. When officers announced themselves and entered, they walked into what they described as one of the most disgusting things they had ever seen. Used needles, rubbish, food, vomit, and drugs littered the floor. Blood and bodily fluids covered the walls and furniture. They said the smell was unlike anything, and the state of Christine and Justin was quite shocking. Wearing blood-stained clothes and covered in track marks. Just before noon on July 19, 2006, Pialala was placed under arrest. Police said it was clear that the pair were so deeply in their addictions, it was likely a matter of time before they died. For the last 9 months, they had been living in the same room, spending every bit of Christine's inheritance money on drugs. Christine told police she was living off of crackers and spending around $500 a day on heroin. But this amount sometimes reached over $1,000. Justin said Christine hadn't left the room once. Christine's police interview began just before 3 p.m., and over the next few hours, the detective begged her to tell the truth. I'd like to be able to understand why, okay? And why would be helpful if you would give us some insight to what's going on. She admitted to driving Chris to the home that day, but said the murders were all his idea. The plan was to buy drugs from someone inside. Christine said she waited outside in the car before they both drove away. He took me over to, your homegirl's house or whatever, and I was to see if Marcus was there. Okay. He got out of the car and drove off. Okay. And I saw him walking in the opposite direction of their house. He was like, just drive, just drive. He pulled out a bag of drugs from his pocket. Uh-huh. I was just damn. I thought he hooked him up pretty good. But then I was wait, I was where he knew he didn't have enough money for what was there. Uh-huh. And he was just I jacked that fool. I jacked that fool. I started freaking out almost because, they knew me, the girls, they were my good friends. And I just couldn't believe then he jacked them, that's what I knew at that point. Uh-huh. But when Chris said he had forgot something, Pear went back. She initially said that again she stayed outside, hearing no gunshots and seeing nothing wrong. She said she only realized something had happened when he came out holding a gun. We gotta go back. It's like I just forgot something, and I was thinking, why would you want to go back when you just jacked these people? Uh-huh. When you just stole from them. And I started to go down their road, and then he ran into the house. The house meaning Tiffany and Marcus' house? Uh-huh. He came running out with the gun, one of the guns in his hand. I didn't hear any gunshots or anything. Okay. After this happened, they drove off, and she clocked in to start her shift at Walgreens just 30 minutes later. I was I finally said, I need to go to work. What did he say, Christine? That he shot them? That he shot them? I'd be freaking out. He would have told you what went on. What did he say? What do you mean he shot them? But the police weren't convinced that this was down to just Chris. Neither were the experts that had analyzed the crime scene. They were still standing by their theory that this was a jealous rage, or something to do with sexual envy on Christine's part. Although Rachel and Tiffany had befriended Christine, it was still entirely possible that maybe she didn't believe they were being genuine and wanted to punish them. Or her anger at being treated so badly in school had poured over, and she had taken it out on them. And whether you do it on your own, okay? Or whether he forces you, you're in that house because do you love your husband? I know I wasn't in the house. Listen to me. Do you love your husband? I love him very much. You love him very much. Okay. Your husband gives exact details of what happens. Okay. Of exact details. You in another conversation. Okay. Give exact details to the person of a distinct event that takes place when the shot is fired. That one of them doesn't even, the quote is, one of them didn't even move off the couch. Specific details of what happened. Either he pours his heart out to you, alright, when you're leaving there, or you're there. Officers were trying to get as much information out of her as they could, but as the interview drew to a close, started to grow weaker and more sick. She was transported to Santa Rosa Hospital, where she informed doctors that she was used to taking heroin every 10 to 15 minutes, and that she hadn't had any since that morning. After she had been given methadone and morphine, they carried on the interviews inside the hospital, but Christine was still pointing the finger at Chris. She was then put on a plane and flown out to Houston before being placed in a jail cell. A final videotaped interview commenced just before midnight. Her story had now changed. The gun was in your hand, and what was he telling you? 1, 2, 3? He was holding on to it. Okay, like on top of your hand or something. Yes, like I couldn't tell you how it was, but that one that like I was scared and I was crimping. And then I had made the gun go off. Not purposely though, but like it went to like the back of the room because I was just like screaming, just like shaking. So somehow you pulled the trigger? Yes. Okay. How many times do you think it went off in your hand? 1,000,000 times. It went off a bunch in your hand. It felt like 1,000,000 times. Even like the first time it felt like 1,000,000 times. So you were pulling the trigger somehow. No, like it's like he has his hand, and my hand was like I couldn't even tell you how like it was, but it was this force that was making it go off. She then said she watched in horror as Chris beat Rachel to death, and according to Christine, he had threatened to do the same thing to her and her family if she told anyone what had happened that night. I was screaming and and just I kept trying to pull away, but I couldn't because I felt like just like spaghetti almost. I'm trying to remember how this happened, because I remember it was just like, it was so quick. Like I heard like other shots like going off. From his gun, I guess? I don't know what kind of gun. There wasn't a third person shooting. No, it's just everything was like, everything got like quiet like. But you know how like in the movie, say even Private Ryan, you can hear like shooting, but like you can't hear like anything else. Police were satisfied that she had finally at least placed herself at the scene. They were still looking for Chris and visited his last known address, his parents' house. They told his family that there was a warrant out for his arrest. They began a search of the property. In his father's bedroom was a little safe, which contained 2 guns. Both matched the 2 types that they were looking for, but by this point, no one had seen Chris in over a week. Detectives looked at his MySpace page and phone records, which led them to Greenville, South Carolina. But Chris had already learned about the manhunt before police could even find him. Testing the guns soon linked them back to the crime scene. But before they could place Chris under arrest, his decomposing body was found in some woods. He had taken an overdose of pills. It is thought that someone had tipped him off about the pending arrest, and he had taken his own life before they could find him. There was now only one person left to talk to, and that was Christine's husband, Justin. He said that Christine had inherited some money after her father passed away, and the couple had bought a small condo with it. Soon after they started living together, a news story about the anniversary of the unsolved murders came out. Christine called Justin in to watch, asking if the billboard picture looked like her. He said Christine broke down and admitted to going to the house to steal money and drugs. She said she was a willing participant, and when Chris started shooting, she didn't hesitate to join in too. Justin also said that Christine had told him that it was her who beat Rachel to death with the gun, not Chris. He said that Christine told him Rachel was crying, asking why over and over, but she didn't stop until she was sure Rachel was dead. Justin said he was completely shocked and scared, but the couple moved out of the condo and went on the run. It later turned out that the anonymous tip that had been made to Crime Stoppers was actually Justin himself. Christine Pialala was charged with first-degree murder, and she entered a plea of not guilty. In a pretrial hearing, Christine's defense team moved to suppress all 3 recorded statements. Although she had been advised of her Fifth Amendment rights before each interview, they argued that her statements were technically involuntary because of the medication she had taken and because she was suffering from opioid withdrawal. But this motion was denied, and the court later said Christine was lucid and capable of understanding the warnings given to her and the nature of her statements. A couple of years later, the now 22-year-old's trial got underway. The defense advised that Christine did not testify. They showed her confession tapes reiterating Christine's statement, saying that it was Chris that had killed the group while she hid. The jurors watched her videotaped statement, in which she told police that Chris was responsible for everything and that she was afraid of him. But the prosecution fired back, saying, over 1,100 calls are made from her to him, and him to her. If you are so deathly afraid of someone, what are you doing on the phone with them for over 1,000 phone calls? Dr. George Glass, a psychiatrist testifying for the defense, said that her heroin addiction could not be overlooked. She was in withdrawal at the time she spoke to the police, and was saying anything she could to get drugs to relieve the pain. Her lawyer said, her friends, the ones who were killed, she only wishes they could understand that she didn't want any of it to happen, but she understands their grief. Rachel's mother disagreed and said, I couldn't take my eyes off her. I really hoped to see something in her eyes in the way of remorse. And it was unbelievable. You know, she never shed a tear, unless it was for herself. The prosecution said there was plenty that pointed towards her being involved directly, and the fact that she had started her shift at work just half an hour after the ordeal, instead of phoning the police, showed that she was no victim. Her statements were inconsistent, and she had already admitted to 2 people, one of which was her husband, that she had actively taken part of her own accord. The prosecution called her denials and blaming everything on Chris a tired and pathetic tactic. Their star witness was actually her husband Justin, but the defense argued that Justin's account could not be trusted. They said he was focused purely on money, staying with Christine for her inheritance, and cashing in on the Crime Stoppers' reward by making up a lie. But the jury disagreed. After just 3 hours of deliberations, Christine Pialala was found guilty. She was 17 at the time of the murders, which meant she would not face the death penalty. She was, however, sentenced to life in prison, with a minimum term of 40 years to serve. She will be eligible for parole in 2046, when she will be 60 years old. More than 5 years after the murders, back in July 2003, the families of the victims said that they felt the guilty verdict would finally allow them to begin moving on with their lives. Christine has filed many appeals since her conviction, but all of them have been denied. Houston Police Sergeant Brian Harris said that he believes that Christine still does not own her part in the crime. For her to truly come to grips with what she has done, she has to acknowledge that there's a darkness in her soul, he said. Christine's stepfather Thomas said, I'm very sorry for these families and their loss. The guy who did this is dead. He was very, very bad. He was a predator. My daughter is paying for someone else's sins. My daughter doesn't deserve this. My daughter is a victim too. It's hard to know exactly what happened that fateful afternoon, and why it did. Police say there were 6 people at the scene. 5 of them are now dead, and 1 of them isn't talking. So with this, it is likely that the full truth will never be fully known. The aftermath of that awful day is still widely felt, with Rachel's father calling it an earthquake for the families and community. Marcus' stepfather said, our lives are very different now. We see things differently than before, and we know that we will never again feel the sense of hope that we used to feel.